who else might jump on coming off whatever meeting they were coming out of last? Hi, Jennifer. Good to have you on. It is 3:02. I want to respect everyone's time, so we'll go ahead and get started. First, as we always do, a few of these administrative items and norm setting. This is Barrick Abramson with Confluence PSG, and this is the August 21st meeting of the Housing Subcommittee of the 1296 Task Force on the Rights of Coloradans with Disabilities. A few just norms for today's meeting. If you are a member of the public who is on our Zoom, one, thank you for being here. We will have public comment in the last 15-20 minutes of our call today. We would ask that you leave your camera off for right now if you are not a member of the committee, and we'll invite you, if you do choose to participate in public comment, to turn your camera on at that time. If you would like to participate in public comment, I would just ask that you shoot a message to either Carrie Steele or myself in the chat. And on the mention of the chat, that will be the only time that we ask people to use the chat. In fact, we're going to ask everyone to not use the chat unless it's something urgent or a message that you want to send privately just to myself or to Carrie. Otherwise, using that chat can be a distraction, certainly for those using a screen reader, but frankly for anyone involved in the conversation. So we try to avoid that. If you are a member of the public who is not on the Zoom and is watching or listening on YouTube or another streaming app, one, we thank you for your interest in this committee's work. If you're interested in that public comment, I'm going to need you to hop over to the Zoom when it comes time for that. Finally, members of the subcommittee, you've heard me say this now for probably 9 months straight, but we do ask that the first time you speak, you introduce yourself by full name, and anytime after that, just say your first name so folks do know who is speaking. With that, let me cover the agenda, and then I will see if Lieutenant Governor wants to offer any welcoming remarks as chair of the task force and one of our executive committee members. Today is a fairly straightforward conversation on a few topics. One, we're going to touch base on the draft ideas that were circulated to everyone. I got comments back from a few people that were minimal to supportive, but before these go live on the website, I'm going to run through them and I want to make sure everybody is comfortable with them. We'll touch base about the public input we've gotten on the first set of ideas. You may remember that first set of ideas was around things like communications, publications, advertising, and contracts, and how we can use that to collect more information and make sure that everything is very easily disclosed in terms of the accessibility features. We've gotten 3 public comments. I'll share those with you when we get to that discussion. I will just tease it a little bit. They're all very positive. People are very enthusiastic about the ideas you all have generated. There's a number of ideas for strengthening them, for ways that we can even elevate some of the elements in them. We're not going to spend time getting into the weeds of those today because our September meeting, that's going to be the whole purpose. By September, we will have rolled out all of your ideas, solicited all of the stakeholder input, and we'll spend the September meeting discussing stakeholder feedback that we've received on Engage Dora. We'll circulate that in advance, and we'll use the September meeting to refine these ideas into what recommendations you all want to put forward. Other than that, today, we're going to talk a little bit, after we've talked about the ideas to date, about other best practices or non-statutory, non-regulatory things that you all might want to include in our report. We're going to talk about things that you think require further research beyond what this task force is situated or has the time to do. And then, while I'm thrilled with having 3 comments, I'd love to have 33 or even 303. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we can best support all of you in getting more input from the public, from constituencies, and make sure these ideas have really been viewed and reacted to, particularly by those who are going to be most affected and most impacted. Before I invite the Lieutenant Governor for any welcoming remarks or thoughts and guidance, do any members of our committee have questions about where we've been or where we are headed with things? Okay, I am seeing no raised hands just yet. I know it's in the afternoon and it's been a long day for folks. Lieutenant Governor Primavera, are you in a place where you can come on camera and say, there we are? Uh,
Yeah.
Ma'am, any words of wisdom, guidance, encouragement, or things you'd like us to consider today?
Well, I've attended a lot of these subcommittee meetings and listened a lot. I just am always impressed by the quality of people that we have on the subcommittees and the ideas that are being generated. I'm really excited. We were in the outdoor subcommittee, I think it was yesterday, and they're coming along really well with lots of really great ideas. I think that the CATA subcommittee is also coming along, and so we've just got a few months left, I think, before we come up with all of our recommendations. But I wanted to thank you, first of all. I know nobody gets paid for this. It's a labor of love. So I just wanted to thank you all for the time that you're spending and the talents that you bring to make sure that we have better access for people with disabilities. And I want to also just really compliment Barrick. I think you do just an excellent job, Barrick. So I appreciate you and the work that you're doing as well. So I have to jump in the car to head to an event in northern Colorado. So in about 10 minutes, I'll be on my phone. But so you'll see me off this one and on a phone, but I'll be listening. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Lieutenant Governor, before I let you slip away, I have to ask, with our governor off in Chicago, where I understand he'll be speaking this evening, does that mean you're our current governor?
Yes, I've been governor since yesterday, and I'm governor today, and I'll be governor tomorrow until he gets back. So,
Well, we appreciate your service. We appreciate your work on these issues and so many for so long, and appreciate you being with us today. So thank you very much.
thanks, Barry.
All right, with that, I'm going to dive us right in. The first thing I'm going to do is just do a quick recap of the ideas we generated most recently that I asked for input on. I know everybody is very busy. I don't think I got them perfect, and that's the reason I didn't hear from everyone. So I just want to spend a few minutes getting your reaction to these. We had two categories here, so I'll go through them by categories. We have one set of recommendations. We have three ideas. Excuse me, they are not recommendations, they're ideas relating to data and accessible housing. The first one that we generated is to direct CDU, the new Colorado Disabilities Opportunity Office, to collaborate with the Department of Revenue, the Department of Local Affairs, and other state agencies to maximize the current and future collection of data to support the greatest available information about the inventory of accessible and adaptable housing. It says that this should build on the data identified in our earlier items, which were, as you may recall, collecting and analyzing data during things like inspections and advertisements. The next idea around data was require the state to conduct an analysis of any system, service, survey, or other instrument of assessing housing features and housing needs to ensure the inclusion of the accessibility features and needs of properties and individuals by zip code, city, county, or other geographic identifier. And just to remind folks, we talked about so much work is going on in the state around housing, period, but certainly around affordable housing. And we want to make sure that accessible housing is an element and a data point in all of those. And the third point around data that was surfaced was to publish the data referenced above and maximize awareness of it among housing authorities, government bodies, developers, and organizations supporting individuals with disabilities. I'll go in a few minutes to the funding ideas, but I want to pause there on the data ideas, and I'll just recap because we've got some folks, it looks like, from the public and interested parties joining for what I think may be the first time. A lot of these data issues came up because as we looked at it, there's a little bit of a shortage on what we know specifically about what types of accessible units are available and where. So this committee wanted to generate some ideas of how we can maximize the information the state does have. That said, let me pause and just get member input. Those three ideas, do they capture our best thinking as a group? And are there things that you'd want to weigh in on before we put these up on Engaged Dora to start getting some public input? Paul, jump in, please.
Hi, Paul Brady. Um, I was late emailing this. I apologize for that. I guess I'd just suggest it builds on and syncs with how the U.S. Census Bureau reports the data. The American Community Survey that they published, it breaks out the data by housing type, so like 1 unit, 2 unit, 10 unit structures, and also by the age of the structure. And that allows us to kind of infer from that, is it stacked multifamily, is it duplex, et cetera.
Well, and I apologize. I got your comments in yesterday and I haven't added them to this document, but and you included a snapshot of some of that national data. So I'll get that language incorporated into it. So we're ensuring that alignment. Other thoughts on these ideas, particularly around data? And I'm fine moving on. I know you all have, we've spent at least 2 calls talking through this. I just want to always create the space. And so, we're sitting here at Wednesday. I never like to post things that I'm asking for public comment on a Thursday afternoon or a Friday. All that to say, I'll be cleaning these up to post on Monday, which means if after today you have a chance to go look at that document and something additional pops in mind, drop me that message and I'll be working end of the week and over the weekend. So you've got that opportunity to weigh in on these. I'm going to move on to our funding ideas. And again, we've had conversations with CHAPA. We've heard from different folks about how the QAPs may be a lever. The 5 ideas we have generated are as follows. 1, direct an appropriate state agency to develop or contract to have developed and make available educational materials targeting developers about the accessibility needs, features, and best practices. Number 2, direct the Colorado Housing and Finance Authority, CHAPA, to modify the Qualified Action Allocation Plan, QAPs, to provide targeted incentives for developing accessible units. Number 3, direct the Middle Income Housing Authority, MIHA, to leverage CHAPA QAP adjustments and any other authorities it has, including elements of bonds issued to promote the development of additional accessible housing. Number 4, direct the Division of Housing to analyze and report to the governor and the legislature on opportunities to leverage Prop 123 funds to increase the inventory of accessible housing. And finally, the 5th idea around funding was to direct CDU or another appropriate office to coordinate and oversee the development of a centralized resource for developers of for sale and for rent properties to expand awareness and utilization of all available programs, including but not limited to LIHTC, LIHTC, MIHA, Prop 123, CHAFA, and other funds. So really focusing on what we saw from CHAFA, what can be done with the QAPs, the newer agency, MIHA, which is focused on middle income housing, as well as what can happen with Prop 123, leveraging some of the elements of those, like the incentives within the QAPs or what MIHA may be able to do to offer incentives. And particularly, we heard from everyone about educating and offering a centralized hub of information about those. Let me pause there and invite comment on those 5 ideas or points of clarity that need to get in there before we go out to the public looking for input, with which we will then reconvene and then develop our recommendation. Brian, please.
Thanks, Barrick. This is Brian Rosbert with Housing Colorado. In terms of the QAP, I know I had mentioned this on the last call around, legislating the QAP. I want to caution us in doing so. It sets an interesting precedent. So I don't know if that's necessarily like a legislative policy priority, but something the governor can't direct. The legislature, I think, can legislate the QAP, but I think it's a dangerous place for us to be. So I would want to maybe word that a little bit differently, instead of like a direct. Just a couple of years back, just some context, there was a piece of legislation that would have legislated the QAP, which kind of gets a little bit fuzzy in terms of how CHAFA operates as a quasi-governmental, but as an authority rather than a state agency. And so I would just want to caution there, like, where I wanted to get in the conversation last time was like to make this cautionary tale a little bit more visible. So just want to kind of raise that flag a little bit.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I'm making a note in here, so I'll make some adjustments. But let me stay with you on that, or invite other members. I'm curious if there is language or pathways and levers that you think do make sense, and it could range from encouraging Chafa to do so, or directing Chafa to at least take into material consideration the needs of those with disabilities as it's putting together the QAP formulas, right? Is there something in that spectrum of it, encourage or direct to consider, that you think walks that line of not being too heavy-handed with what we ask the ledge to direct?
Sure. Let me think on that a little bit, Barrick.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't have like a good, and right now the timing is a little bit tricky because the Chafa is like in the middle of doing their QAP. So, it's on a 2-year cycle. So it's something that, maybe some time to figure out kind of the right way to do that. And to probably bring Chafa into the conversation of like what would make the most sense in terms of like incentivizing or encouraging, the development of accessible units using the LIHTC or the state credit, or even now the middle income housing tax credit.
Understood. And Brian, I welcome you to follow up with me. What I may do for now and share back with all of you is just draft some language around exploring options to encourage this to happen, as opposed to naming the actual mechanism of change and action, but still speaking very clearly to our intent to address it. Cassidy.
Yeah, Cassidy Roberts with Disability Law Colorado. I was also gonna add something about number 2. I like incentives for developing accessible units. I think also potentially like incentives or requirements, or however we want to word it, for adopting like the Kelsey's design standards. I think adding that as part of this as well.
Cassidy, talk to me a little bit more about what you think that could like be built into that idea or as an additional.
I think as an addition, because the Kelsey's design standards are much more holistic than just talking about accessible units. And I personally think don't go far enough almost in terms of like the individual units, and like defining what a specific unit, like what features should be in a specific unit, but just talking about units, I don't think encapsulates everything that the Kelsey's design standards do. So I like having them both.
Yeah.
Hopefully that makes sense.
I don't want to try to replace my judgment for all of yours. So what I will do is I will draft something and circulate it all on this document for you all to weigh in on. Shelley, I don't mean to pick on you, but I've got a developer on, and so it's incumbent on me to ask when I think about this funding mix to increase inventory and the use of incentives. Do these seem like the right mix to you, or do you have thoughts on how we've framed this for now? I think Shelley's fighting for
Sorry
the
about that. I'm trying to get off mute here. Apologize. I couldn't make that work quick enough. So on the funding requirements is what you're asking, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we've got these ideas about, make available education materials for developers about needs, features, and best practices. Similarly, about making a package of information available for everybody from housing authorities to developers about the whole litany of funding tools from LIHTC to MIHA to Prop 123 and CHAFA, and as well as some other things looking at encouraging MIHA to leverage their opportunities. Do these feel right given the limited set of resources or tools that we have identified?
So I thanks for asking the question, Barrick, and this is Shelley Marquez. I'm with Mercy Housing. What I would say is when you think about the development process and everyone that's involved in it, it's not just the developers. You know, you've got city agencies, you have, you know, your general contractors, you have code. I mean, there are so many other folks that touch these deals, architects, you know, that, you know, so does that education need to be a little broader as we're thinking about accessibility, because a developer is going to work with an architect firm to really help us provide the right guidance on what our concept or thoughts should look like. And then you have city that's going to provide the permits and the you know, do the rest of the zoning. So for me, that's what I feel like. There are so many different hands that a development touches that you can't just say, are we providing education to the one or two folks that are leading this development, but who else needs to be part of that process? That's where I go.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I've made a note, I'll go in there and expand the audience of who we intend to be speaking to with these educational materials. Paul, somebody referenced architects there in that last point, and you happen to have your hand up. Let me bring you in here.
I guess an old comment and a new comment. The old one is maybe somehow linking construction defect reform and the idea is to increase condos with accessible or attainable housing. So use them as maybe a pilot program to test these ideas, but also provide an incentive. You know, for instance, if it's a right to cure is one of the big suggestions to improve condo construction defect litigation, grant accessible housing that right to cure over other types. And it's going to create a natural promotion for, you know, potentially for these unit types. The new idea that I was thinking about the other day is maybe the state. All right. So currently the state has the state housing board and it has a state building code, and it's generally governing modular mobile housing options. If you expand the participation in that building code to everybody statewide, and say if you have a project in Denver or Grand Junction, wherever, you have option A to go with the local jurisdiction or option B to go with the state code. Developers could make the choice at that time which one behooves them to do which one or the other. And it could be a timing decision. Sometimes, you know, when we're going through Denver, we budget 6 to 9 months to get through their process. So the building permit process alone. So if we can get through the state process faster in 3 months, that's a natural incentive that we would steer our clients to go to the state building code. And when you go that path, you could then put increased accessible unit type percentages or other features in that code that would be a trade-off in lieu of that expedited path. Another could be a lot of our clients want to do projects in multiple jurisdictions, but there's uncertainty because you have to design for each jurisdiction's preferences and their personalized code. But if you had the option to always go to the state code, that would give you certainty as a developer that it would be the same in any jurisdiction you were in.
Apologies, I'm not looking away from you. I've got 2 other screens here where I'm trying to capture all of these ideas as we go. So I appreciate that. Really interesting idea that I've made some notes and I'll clean up, and Paul probably run by you directly and then run by the group to try to get these up for sharing. Other thoughts on either the incentives or the resources specifically related to the financing to encourage, and I'll just come back as I do every month we're together of what the legislature charged us with doing. And among our requirements to make recommendations was recommendations to meet future housing demand, including the financing for low-income housing development and any other statutory requirements. But on the funding piece, before I move us on to a broader conversation, any other thoughts on the hammer or the, I guess, the carrot or the stick? Or the classroom, so to speak. Rochelle, jump in.
Trying to find my hand up,
Yeah.
my raised hand, sorry. I did spend the last 2 days getting to interview about 37 potential legislators for the state and House seats. And we ran a lot of these points past every single one of them and put it in our notes for the ACCIL and the links for them to look up. And a lot of the feedback that we got was they were very much interested in universal design incentives. They were all much more apt to talk about incentives rather than tax credits. But something really interesting that did just come up is that I'm like, while I was getting ready to come into this meeting, we received a draft of a bill that is going to be proposed during the special legislature. And there's some language in it that I didn't know if we could build upon that talks very specifically, and just thinking about Paul's idea about there being any kind of a state entity. Is there some way to build on the incentivizing how anybody who is a builder and this really would go, I guess the way that this is being worded is in a multi-story dwelling units, being able to incentivize the number of accessibility points that are required by the state accessible housing standards. And then they kind of go into a bunch of percentages. But if there were a way to incentivize the more points you have in the accessibility points required by that state housing standard, is there something that could be attached to that as a way of legitimizing or incentivizing by a point system?
Rochelle, I appreciate you flagging both the concept in there, as well as do we want to leverage some of that language that's there. I don't think the draft has yet been circulated, but I saw some early iterations on it. We should be able to get our hands on a draft no later than next Monday, though. So I'll see if we can get some language, circulate it to this group, and see if there are things, to your point, that we want to pull from and align with. Paul, your hand's back up. Jump in.
A suggestion to that comment. We're figuring out those accessibility points when we're getting our site development entitlements and going through the zoning process. And so a natural trade-off would be first just the state making a statement, hey, local jurisdictions, we encourage you to trade density incentives, parking reductions, less masonry or other things in the zoning and entitlement process in exchange for extra points.
Thank you, Paul. I'm muting myself because I have an old school keyboard that makes the loud clicking. Anyone else on funding? All right, we've got quite a few additional ideas here, and I wouldn't call them all brand new. It's really iterations and building on what you've all. Oh, was that a hand thrown back up?
It was. I guess I'll toss two out that are half formed, and I don't know where to take them, but I'm sure the group can maybe do something. Insurance. We're seeing a lot of our developer clients really struggle with property insurance. And so maybe if there's a way to shelter or provide a preferred path of insurance, that might be a interesting path. And the other is property taxes. Is there way that that could tie into this. But both those are, like I said, I don't really know.
I don't either. I may draft some language that's really, and I'll invite members to weigh in. The language I might bring in is going to focus on, is going to fit into a big topic we're going to cover today, which is what are the other things that need to be explored that we just don't have the time for, given the deadline for our recommendations. But I will also see if I can't get hold of the insurance commissioner or their office, see if there's something there. And I have no doubt that Rep. Ortiz will be a strong and vocal voice at the special session when we're talking property tax. But I'll touch base with him of whether there are any opportunities there, or, and as I'm hearing it, although we expect to see some things in the special session, there's probably gonna be some follow-up pieces on property taxes in the upcoming 2025 legislature. Shelley.
Yeah, I would just say on multifamily development, Paul, there is, for nonprofit affordable housing developers, you do have an ability to go to, and I even believe for profit, to get property tax exemptions through a special limited partnership agreement through the housing authority. And so developers do try to utilize that. There's sometimes a fee associated with it. So that's already in place. And I would echo your comments around insurance requirements. I think what we're seeing on the multifamily side, that last year insurance requirements for development went up anywhere from 30 to 50% on a property, depending on where you're located and what are, what's taken place. So it's a challenge that all developers are facing, is the rising cost of insurance rates. This year was the increase in insurance costs was not as significant as last year, but still another increase. So you add that to the cost. I'm just not sure, how does that, are there ways to, we've brought this issue up as developers and in a affordable housing forum with the governor. We talked about one of the challenges for affordable housing developers was the rising cost of insurance. And so, Barrick, that could be something that goes to a conversation to the insurance commissioner. But it's definitely a challenge.
Yeah. Heard clearly, and I think we probably cannot in the next 90 days sort out insurance, but I think we can certainly start surfacing some pieces, name it as something that there needs to be additional action on, for a variety of reasons. I will move us on in just a minute, but I want to just take a pause to see if any of the members want to weigh further on the financing and funding or any of the ideas you've heard from your peers here on the committee. Okay, then I'm going to shift gears. We have spent a whole lot of time talking about what the state can do using its authority and power. And whether that's require things, whether that's incentivize things, whether that's enforce things or have new rules. I'll clean out everything that we've talked about into some ideas we can share. We also have the opportunity to share recommendations of what we think different actors in this space should do as best practice. Whether that is the nonprofit community who support individuals with disabilities, whether that is private sector or nonprofit developers, or others that the state may not have the agency to force them to do things. There's an opportunity for us to publish things like best recommendations or best practices, encouraged recommendations. There's also, as I've just been alluding to, the opportunity with the new Colorado Disabilities Office coming online and the state government obviously continuing its work, whether that's through the Civil Rights Division, CCRD, or the work of the Division of Housing, or the work of the Division of Local Government, for us to encourage further work, further research, further convening, further listening. So I want to open a pretty broad conversation of, other than the heavy hand of the state requiring things or paying for things, what are some things that you all would say we want to consider encouraging or highlighting in our ultimate report? Karen.
Sorry, I'm like trying to navigate all my different clicks. Karen Kallenberg with Habitat of Colorado. Um, and I apologize because this might be somewhere else, but I remember an idea that we talked about. And I'm not sure if we talked about it for being a mandate, but I really liked when we were talking about when you're looking for an apartment or a home, requiring requiring there to be listed, you know, if there was an elevator or whatever accessibility might be part of that unit. And I don't know if that was part of one of our earlier suggestions or not, but I think that's a good one.
So Karen, right now, that is one of the ideas we have up on Engage Dora. And just, I know we've gone through so many, so let me read what we've got out there right now. What we say is require any publication or other advertisement for a property available for lease that lists any features of the unit or property to list all of the accessibility features, which should include but not be limited to counter heights, grab bars, outdoor and garage available accessible parking spots, numbers of elevators, and which common building amenities are accessible, such as pools, common rooms, or other. We also have an idea requiring any multi-unit property to list the number of available type A units, type B units, type C units, units with accessibility related communication features, visual and audible, and units with roll-in showers. So right now we do have those out as we're floating the idea of requiring. We'll see where the public input is, and I think that you may want to entertain the idea of requiring, and if the state doesn't go to require, at least encourage folks. But we're there right now.
Great,
Brian.
thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for going there. And I know we've talked about so many different ideas. It's sometimes hard to keep track, so that's why I have a dozen tabs and documents open. Brian, jump in.
Sure. Thanks, Barrick. Brian Rosbert again. You know, I think Cassidy brought this up. You know, the ideas around the design standards on the Kelsey, like that the Kelsey has, and I'm sure there are other groups that are out there doing this work, but you know, something about while it might not be a requirement in law, like I think lifting up some of these best practices that are around already, that could be, you know, coming out of this task force could be a powerful way to sort of at least say to the developer community, hey, there's these things out there. You may not be required to do them, but check this out. Like, you know, and maybe even a report from CDU or another group, but you know, something around, you know, we've talked a lot about cost. We've talked a lot about the cost delta, and that delta is significantly decreased on the front end. You know, and I think about, you know, what some of the folks at Shopworks look at, and I can't remember the name of the person who does this analysis, but you know, the cost and the time on the front end of design is significantly less than, you know, further on in design or even repurposing you know, existing spaces. And so like, how do we as a group, as a task force who's been talking about this for, you know, 9 months, like what are some recommendations that may not be codified in state law, but you know, where can a resource be created or shared that lifts up some of these best practices that already exist?
Thanks, Brian. And I'm going to invite everybody to kind of build on this. And Cassidy, I'll go to you next, and then Shelley, with any ideas you want. But I'll also invite the group, if you want to build on Brian's. I think we can develop an idea that's identifying best practice to lift them up and promote them. If folks want to identify particular areas that you'd like to see best practices identified, I'm happy to include that in the idea. We can also make the idea a little more broad and ask for the state, whether that's CDU or DOH or others, to identify and convene folks, particularly those with lived experience and professional experience, to weigh in on that. Let me go to Cassidy and then Karen.
Yeah, I really liked Brian's point. And I just like with the Kelsey's standards too, I think it's great because they have like elements of design that are considered to be essential, and then they have those that go above and beyond. So they have kind of like the bottom line, I forget what they call it, level of accessibility, and then they have like gold and platinum. So I do think like even if you know, the QAP process or otherwise, it was required for developers to meet that like baseline level, I think, you know, still highlighting the full design standards as best practices, I think would be a good idea.
I appreciate that. And I will just share, you know, we've worked with some other groups where they may be developing code or they may be developing requirements, and they say, here is that minimum, and here in Appendix A is a whole other set of best practices or standards that you could elevate to. So we could go in that direction. Karen and then Shelley, please.
I would just add on, I also like the best practices idea and going into what we would like to see in that. I remember a very early on conversation we had that it wasn't just about like the unit, but it was about the surrounding community as well. In terms of, is there transportation close by? Is there, you know, is there a grocery store? So I would just, I think that's something that could go into the best practice because it goes beyond just the unit, but it goes to quality of life and what also needs to be there so you can exist outside of your unit as well.
Thank you, Karen. And I do recall that. And for guests on this call, I'll just share, we had really robust conversations back in the spring that when we talk accessibility, kind of the arc of our conversation started with accessible to whom and in what ways, because we found that there was a knee-jerk tendency to think of accessibility as strictly in terms of mobility and things like zero step and or door accessibility and grab bars. We also have folks with a host of other different types of disabilities, whether that's visual, auditory, development, intellectual development, and others. And that led to a conversation about, as was just highlighted in that comment, living somewhere is a lot more than the unit. It's what's around and how someone gets there and gets about their community. So that's the background. And I appreciate you bringing us back to that point, and I'll add some of that in there. Let me go to Shelley and then Paul.
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback on Brian's comments and think they're just would support that. And so it makes me think about who are those in the field today, who are those industry experts or experts that, you know, that are affordable housing. And Brian, not trying to put Housing Colorado, I mean, who's providing education today or resources, but could Housing Colorado be one of those resources? I know CHAPA does a lot of education and training around accessibility requirements. And so let's, instead of recreating something, what is already in place today that a lot of developers know, if I need a subject matter expert in this field, I know where to go to. It versus trying to retrain folks to think about, oh yeah, I need to go to that resource now. But what is currently being utilized and how do we leverage that to really impact the field?
Shelley, I really appreciate that point, and I can probably get away with saying this since I don't see any legislators on the phone. I think that we know that there is a tendency, often and overwhelmingly well-intentioned, to come up with a new idea that somebody new should do, and we don't often take the time to find out who's already doing something like that or where can we leverage existing programs. So I really would encourage this group to keep thinking that way and building on. We may develop these hubs and these resources, and it's great that we've got CDU, that new office coming online, but where are people already getting their information? There's often that sense of information overload. I know we've got some folks on this call that represent some of our counties and cities, and they may have thoughts of how we can, you know, coordinate with them, whether that's getting out through organizations like CCI or CML or CCAT, Metro Caucus of Mayors. But Shelley, I really appreciate your point of if we've got folks like Housing Colorado and other offices, how can we make sure that anything we're doing is also tapping those existing conduits? Paul, jump in.
I mean, this is another piggyback. It's an indirect incentive, but maybe it's more efficient if, for instance, we were to say if you use the Kelsey design guidelines or something similar, you can use the previous version of the energy code. Our developer clients know that there's cost savings there, but that's maybe not in line with policy goals, and cost of construction is a tough one. So if we look at the XL Energy Design Assistance Program, what they would do is they would give the design team a rebate to fund the extra time it took to do an energy model. And so there could be a small rebate to help figure out how to implement those design guidelines or work through it. It doesn't even have to be a rebate. It could be, there's continuing education requirements for all professionals. Even just learning and implementing that, those new design guidelines, you'd learn a lot in that process, and that should count for satisfying your continuing education. And then a third option is, I think this is a federal program. We haven't participated in it, but there's an R&D tax credit for design firms. And what it is trying to say you can pay a lower tax rate if you demonstrate your efforts were in line with research and development priorities outlined. And some people try to do this with sustainability, but the extra time and learning it would take to implement, like the design guidelines, the Kelsey design guidelines, that could maybe qualify for an R&D tax credit, even, at the state level.
Apologies again, I'm trying to make sure I capture this, even though my teammate Carrie's capturing notes too. I capture them in my own document, make sure I get these ideas right. Other thoughts, and let me kind of pull us up to be really aspirational. And I'm curious, when you think of things, whether it was the Kelsey conversation and what they've done with design standards, or things you've seen locally or in other states as best practices, that, hey, when this developer did this, or when this county partnered with this nonprofit or this developer, this housing authority, they were able to do something effective. Are there other types of best practices or partnerships you've seen work that we should elevate and encourage more of? Paul, your hand's back up. The floor is yours.
It might be a simple one, but say we designate a project as a best practice. Let's not just put it on a glossy award, brochure page, but distribute the documents or some of that key information that allowed it to be executed, whether it's the products used or the design details implemented. If we widely distribute that, that'll ease the path to implementation.
Paul, you're speaking my language. I can't count the number of work groups I used to manage that subscribe to what I call the publish and phrase strategy. They brought brilliant people together and wrote a really thick book and put it on a shelf, and then wondered why nobody did anything with it. So I would love to see this group further ideate on this as we go forward, of when we identify best practices, or when we find the data from something you all are putting forward is working, how do we bring people together with some regularity, and how do we elevate that and put it into people's hands instead of on a shelf? So I really like that idea. Let me go up to Karen and then Brian.
I think my comment builds on that. I was thinking of, I don't know, I'm a visual learner. I like to see things. So why are we even going to put it on a piece of paper? Like, what if we did a tour of homes or a tour of best practices where people can see? I mean, I feel like, well, I wanted to say we could play a drinking game with the amount of times we've mentioned the Kelsey, but I wasn't sure if I should say it, but I said it anyway. But I mean, I feel like we do have some good examples out there, and whether it's Barrick encouraging, I mean, legislators, especially during the off season, I mean, they go on different bus tours to see what is happening across the state. So is there one way to encourage them as part of our work to actually experience some of these best practices so they can see that it's done, and or extend that to more stakeholders? Because I think education and showing what can be done. I think, again, we were all very impressed with what we learned from the Kelsey. So I can only imagine, you know, providing that as an opportunity versus just a webinar, if at all possible.
Yeah, great point, Karen. And again, when I offer things, it's not me advocating, it's me trying to pull the threads of ideas I'm hearing together into something. Karen, I could see a world where an idea comes together, that someone is responsible, and maybe it's CDU, for collaborating with someone like the Division of Housing to go put on some of these tours and highlight some of these things that are going on as an educational tour for everyone from our state legislators to our local elected officials at the city and county level, to highlight some of these things. I know Speaker McCluskey was just down in BV, looking at some small homes that are being manufactured there and some things going on affordable housing, and then back home in her district in Summit, looking at some things like that. So that I believe the speaker undertook on her own, but maybe we could get some of these offices to put these ideas in front of legislators, so they are getting informed about what is happening. I'm going to go to Brian and then Paul, and then while it is the middle of the meeting, Rep Ortiz just joined us. I know he's bouncing around in meetings getting ready for the special session. So Rep Ortiz, after I go to Paul and then Brian, I'll invite you if you wanted to make comments to the group. Paul, yours. Yeah.
Oh,
I'm sorry, Brian, when I go to you and then Paul.
sure. Karen actually beat me to the punch a little, and this is actually something that we do as Housing Colorado, is we do site tours with our community, and I can just, make a commitment here to, as we identify projects and places that are doing this well, to lift them up at least within our community, and to look at, our site tours are more than just going and looking around as well. We do a half hour, 45 minutes of, how is this financed? What are the special features? Kind of a primer or an orientation to a building or a place. So I'm committing as my organization that, as these things kind of get identified, as these places get identified, that we are more than happy to take the lead on logistics, implementation, and the other thing is we do have awards that recognize affordable housing projects and programs and people that are going above and beyond. And we recognize the Atlantis community, their new project this year. I could see that being a place for a tour, or for some kind of deeper movement beyond just like the award piece that we do. So I'm making kind of a commitment there, but also love that idea of getting people into places to see what is possible, and what more could we imagine together.
Thank you, Brian. And I think this group and the state and others will take you up on that. And it's great to be able to build on what you're already doing on that front. Paul, your thoughts?
I'll beat this topic to death, but emphasize, I think it's the local officials that are going to have the most impact. I'll point to Broomfield as an example. Over the last few years, those elected officials have made it a point to prioritize affordable housing. And so without policy in place, we knew as a development design community that you did not want to go in front of the city council, or I think it's city council, and ask their approval without having a response to how you were tackling that problem. And so if the emphasis is, accessibility, even just having every project present their solution to it, that'll force change.
I like that highlight. Representative Ortiz, I don't know if you're in a place where you can come on camera and chat with us for a minute?
I mean, I can chat for a sec since it's only the middle way, and I'll probably have more to say at the end as I'm jumping on here.
That's fine.
You know,
We can do either. I just wanted to give you the floor since you weren't here at the start of the meeting.
yeah, no worries. I just want to thank everybody for their time and their work. And since I haven't been here for most of the meeting, I got nothing else to offer other than gratitude. So thanks.
That's great. And Representative, just so you know, we spent the first part of the meeting really reviewing and updating and tightening up the ideas that this group will be sharing starting next week on Engage Dora around data about accessible housing and ideas relating to funding and increasing inventory. And we've now moved into a conversation of beyond the statutory things that the state can require be done or incentivized to be done or fund. What are the things that in terms of highlighting best practices, encouraging partnerships or other models that have been seen that may warrant scaling and more education about what might we want to do there. So members, I invite you to continue building. It sounds like there's pretty broad support for encouraging, if not driving, these types of educational spotlights and tours of examples of where partnerships have come together or individual developers or local jurisdictions have projects that are interesting. Other things that you think we may want to highlight or encourage be done voluntarily outside of what we're going to ask the state to do as requirements. Okay, I will leave this topic open. I will also emphasize, particularly on this front, this is part one of this. The other thing that we will continue to have as a conversation, as you all know, we have four. Paul, I will pause and bring you in.
Sorry for the late click.
Not at all.
What about the state promoting projects that need funding or help to see the reality? We're working on one. It's a private development in Lone Tree for special populations, and they're trying to mostly do private funding, and they're doing fundraising. They're passing the hat. Can the state elevate that ask somehow by recognizing they understand these best practices or they see this as a model, and that people should be more willing to donate?
And I'm certainly not here to say what we do or don't ask the state, but I think that's an idea we'll put on the table and we'll workshop it as a group on that. I'm not going to force us to keep this topic going. We will come back and revisit it. What I was just starting to say is we'll come back to continue a conversation about the best practices, voluntary efforts we want to encourage. Our focus really is on what we're legislatively tasked with doing, and that's identifying what is the need, what is the inventory, what are the mechanisms the state can deploy to increase that inventory and to increase the funding for it. So we're going to continue to focus on that. We've shared now on Engage Dora the ideas around contracts, around communications and publications, where I think there's some really innovative ideas about including these things and things like inspections. So we really keep an active track of it. Between our last meeting and today, we've tightened up and expanded some ideas around the funding and financing. As I said, my commitment to all of you is to get those all cleaned up and recirculated to you so we can get them up on Engage Dora next week. We will spend our September and October meetings really workshopping those ideas and what we've heard from stakeholders. On that note, to date, we've had 3 comments, and if I'm correct, one of them may be from somebody on this screen, which means we've heard from 2 members of the public. This is where I lean in and ask how Carrie and I can best support all of you, and I'm going to ask make a 2-part request. I'm going to ask that you all think very seriously and diligently about 2 things. One, who Carrie and I can reach out to on your behalf to share these ideas and ask that they weigh in or they share word of this. And that can be anywhere from, hey, Barrick, here's 6 Twitter handles who I think you should go tag in a social media post, or here's 6 professional associations that I think would be best if they heard from you on behalf of the committee. So Carrie has already started for another committee a working Google Doc, and I will just ask her to duplicate that, share the link with all of you, and you can either just add to that Google Doc, or you can fill my inbox on a daily basis as new ideas come to mind with all of the ideas of who you think we should tag. What I will do is make a new set of social media posts on LinkedIn, on X, on Instagram, and on Facebook. I'll share those with you. You're welcome to repost them. If there's folks you want us to tag or forward them to, do that. My other ask is going to be that I will take time between now and early next week to clean up these ideas, share them, and get ready to list them up on Engage Dora. I'm going to ask all of you to set aside 15, 20 minutes and make your own list of at least 15 people that you're going to email or text or send things on social media so that we can really start getting these ideas socialized. My goal is, number one, to have those who are most affected by these ideas be able to weigh in and strengthen them, bring that lived experience. I also will be transparent. I want to stress test these. I want to find out where there's people that have concerns so that we can make these ideas so powerful that they overcome those. So that's going to be my 2 asks. We'll share a Google document and ask you to either on there or in my inbox, send ideas of who you'd like us to contact or tag. And I'm going to ask you all to give some time to making your own list of contacts that you will share the ideas with when we get this next batch posted next week. Shelley, as I was rambling about my asks of everybody, I saw your hand go up and go back down, so I want to bring you in.
Yeah, my mind is doing the same thing, Barrick. So thank you, Shelley Marquez, Mercy Housing. And I'm not trying to pick on Brian today, but I just think about, it's important for this committee to be aware, like in Colorado, Housing Colorado puts together the largest housing conference. I think you're anticipating over 1,000 people there. How do we get this done? I mean, for me, I think that's an opportune time to seek feedback, Brian. Maybe it's something we can brainstorm offline, but that's the audience we're talking about. It's developers. It's this community that is developing affordable, accessible housing. How do we get in front of them with ideas, suggestions, feedback? So I just put that out there, and I don't know, Brian, if I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but I just like it's here in the next 6 weeks.
If she won't, I will, Brian. And I'm happy to
Sure.
send a QR code, a short link, or pretty graphics. You tell me. But let me get you in here,
Yeah.
Brian.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of ways to go about this. One is our conference. The other way is our email list is 5,000 people strong in Colorado. So I think once some of these other ideas are up on Engage Dora, that might be the opportune time for us to to communicate with our community. I will say, for people attending our conference, the Kelsey is making a presentation at conference, so they are doing a workshop for us. So we can also encourage people kind of, hey, if you're going to be at conference, check this out. Yeah, we're happy to use our community and our tools to communicate with them.
Brian, because I have no shame in trying to get this in front of as many people, I'm going to follow up with you and see if we can't get something out to your email list or even a little flyer or something at the conference so we can elevate awareness of this and see who we can engage.
Sounds great. Thank
you. Other folks have questions, or if you want to put the ideas for Carrie and me, I welcome them now. We'll also follow up, and I think I will not hesitate to not only reach out, but to follow up once, twice, and 3 times to get this from you. Do you all have thoughts you want to offer on this call, though, about avenues for some stakeholder engagement and raising profile of this? Fair enough. Carrie and I will get that Google Doc that we've got for the other committee duplicated for all of you and out to you. We'll email you with that link and my first of what will probably be 7 to 10 reminders to add names and handles to it and to put your own list together. And Brian, I hear your point. Let's get the bulk and the real meat of these ideas up there. So we're hitting people with all of them, and we'll do that sometime next week so we can really get reaction to these ideas. Members of the public, I know we've got a few folks. I don't know if you're just listening in or if you'd like to address a group. If you'd like to comment and speak to this group, I'd ask you to drop a message in the chat, and we'll move on to that. It looks like we've got at least a few that are just enjoying the conversation, and I certainly appreciate that. Just to kind of recap it, and this is in part for those who joined a few minutes into it or halfway through, whether that was members of the public or reportees who I know is jumping around. We talked at the top of this, some of the ideas around data and some very clear ideas about not only collecting it and expanding the data that's being collected, but publishing and putting that into the hands of all of the right folks. We talked on the funding side about everything from making educational materials available. And today on our call, we talked about really expanding the audience of who those go to, that it shouldn't just be developers or local housing authorities. It needs to include people upstream and downstream of that, whether that's architects or contractors and design firms, everyone along that. We came in talking about directing CHAFA to modify the QAPs. There was some hesitation about legislative directive or specific legislative handling of what the QAPs are, but a desire to make sure that the intent is to see CHAFA look at the QAPs and put consideration and weight to the need for accessible and affordable accessible housing. We talked about doing the same with MIHA and where they may be able to leverage some of that. And we talked about the Division of Housing and Prop 123 funds. And finally, this idea of this massive hub of information for all of these different actors. In our discussion about newer ideas to build on that, there was a desire that I heard pretty broadly across this group about incorporating the full design standards that the Kelsey talked to us about and that they're talking about. Some questions about whether there's a way to link construction defect efforts for incentives to expand the accessible inventory, particularly looking at things like the right to cure and whether we can get front of line there. Some questions around what's happening with the special session and particularly around property tax. Can we either in special session or what will likely be follow-on efforts during the 2025 session ensure that in every conversation, accessible housing is at that table? Is there anything I missed in that recap that members want to offer? Paul, please.
We tried to apply the Kelsey design standards to a project we were working on, and I struggled a little because it was, I don't know, I think a little more specificity in it or regulation written more like a code and less like a guideline could help. I think it has great ideas. It's just, it's not in the same format as the ANSI standard, which the state law references. So just one caution.
Message heard. Yeah, and I think in addition to that, and I skipped over it because there were so many ideas. We talked about this balance of requirements and best practices and setting an aspirational minimum, but also providing kind of an appendix of here are some additional best practices that if you really want to go all in, are some things you can do. I'm not connecting that directly to what you offered, Paul. I take your note of caution of if we're going to put something forward, we need to make sure that it's actionable and that it's consistent with what the industry is used to.
Yeah, and I was actually looking through it, trying to pick out 5 or so really, really great comments from it that would be actionable and very specific. And I don't have that list. So that kind of illustrates the struggle.
I gotcha. Yeah, and maybe we can spend some time on a future call talking about that at that intersection of requirements and best practices and how we crosswalk those. We had expected some of these conversations to go a few minutes longer. We also had set aside 15 minutes or 10 or 15 minutes for public comment. And although I'm thrilled to see some folks from the public and from different firms around town who I know have great relationships with a lot of our municipal and county leaders, They're not there right now wanting to offer public comment. All that to say, I'm probably going to let us go a few minutes early. But before I do, Rep Ortiz, I kind of gave a lightning fast rundown on what we've been talking about. And I know you're getting ready to head into special session. Thoughts you'd like to offer this group as we continue our contemplations, as we get ready to put ideas up on Engage Dora. And next month, we pick up the task of taking that stakeholder input and starting to advance the recommendations to you and the rest of the executive committee.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just going to jump in, especially the conversation around special session. I'm not sure who brought that up again, jumping in late in the meeting, so apologies for that. Just busy doing other stuff. But I'm wondering, whoever had made those comments, if you have been engaging with your legislators. Like that's kind of the gateway into making sure something happens there. So just by a way of hands, and again, I don't know what that comment was. Who here has been trying to engage with the legislators on? Okay, great. Like I love the community. I see we will for me. He's always been a great partner to work with. But just curious as to who has been working with legislators, if anybody has, show of hands on trying to get something done for accessible housing for this special session. And I'm not seeing any, so that's not a good sign. But luckily you have someone that lives this way, so I am bringing forward a bill during special session to try and incentivize Type A and Type B housing using the current point system. I've been working specifically in mandates because ADA has been law for 34 years and we haven't solved the problem. We have people trying to argue that we don't even know what the stock is, but there are studies that know what the stock is nationally, that 1% are Type A and less than 5% are either Type A or Type B accessible. And we know that 20 to 25% of humans in the United States live with a disability. So I'm all for making sure that we study and find out more information, but that should not stop us from moving forward with a plan to make sure we're securing accessible housing. What I am going to be bringing forward is going to create tax cuts for future development for those that are going beyond what's currently required for the point system for ADA. And so if you want specifics on that, reach out to my offices. We will work with you. I'm only informing. I'm not trying to get the support or not support of the subcommittee here. But, for whoever said, hey, we need to make sure that every time we're having this discussion, like, that's got to start with you guys, right? Like, because you're not always going to have a David Ortiz in office that's going to be thinking of doing this every single time and from different perspectives based on the years of stakeholding that they've already done. So just want to make sure I reflect that back and say that it's incumbent on us, the citizenry of Colorado, to make sure that we're engaging with our electeds when it comes to special sessions or regular legislative sessions. The issue that we're running into is that, we can't, and maybe this is something we should look to do, is create a new category of units for incentives. And that if they are specifically Type A, Type B residential, that's a new category, because we're running into an issue on, well, what do we categorize this? Which kind of took the shape of, of the language that we're currently working with. As it pertains to everything else, excited to see how the ideas are received. I do appreciate everyone's hard work and time. You all know that I'm getting paid big bucks of $42K to do this work, and you guys are getting paid less to do this. So I just want to extend again gratitude and appreciation, and looking forward to how the subcommittee brings forward their recommendations to the executive and how we solve this problem.
Thank you, Representative Ortiz. And I say it frequently, but I can't say it frequently enough. We are also appreciative for you championing all of this work in the legislature, for your continued leadership on these issues, and engaging with these subcommittees when we know you've got so much going on. And I know it's because it is so important to you. So just want to appreciate you always being here with this group as a thought partner. Paul, your hand is up. Jump in.
Something Representative Ortiz said that sparked the thought. I think I mentioned previously, looking at the HUD data or the census data, 75% of housing is manufactured or single family detached. And those aren't under the jurisdiction of the Colorado Title IX, the accessibility law. One of the obstructions to making that type of housing accessible is our soils and site drainage. At least that's the comment I always get. I hate how high out of the ground our new houses are. They look stupid, but it's a litigation thing. They don't want the foundation or the wood framing near the dirt, and they want the dirt sloping away from the house at such a steep slope so that the water doesn't seep into the ground and cause the soils to expand. But if there were some way we find a solution to that, that might remove a roadblock.
Paula, are you suggesting that there might be a regulatory or code fix to that? Is that about
Even a best
the
practice?
technology and the knowledge? Yeah.
I don't know. It could be from that or a regulatory code, because there are codes that regulate how fast that dirt has to slope away from the house.
And this is an area that I will be transparent as well, outside of my knowledge or my pay grade. When you were talking, Rep Ortiz raised his hand, so let me get Rep Ortiz in, and then Rochelle, I'll come to you.
Yeah, and Paul is an example of why, you know, we're so lucky to have people like him that have that professional expertise to bring it to bear when we're thinking about our solutions. Because I hear that, and I'm not saying it's not valid, but to me, and maybe you can help me finagle this, and since I don't have your expertise, but it just sounds like an excuse. Like, then extend the foundation to allow for ramps. You already have a foundation of a house that you're building for leg walkers, and extend the foundations to allow for ramps. Ramps don't have to be that long or that windy. Like, there is a way to design homes and to design anything to make sure that it functions within the current guidelines of whatever rules that we have to work around, right?
Yeah.
There are ways to do that. It's just about, you know, it's about leveraging awesome humans like you to use your expertise to say, okay, how do we do this in a cost-effective but efficient way so there's no confusion? Is it just guidelines, or are we just creating mandates? And like, also with those mandates, like creating specifics on this is the best practice, this is what you should follow. You can go beyond that, but this is the floor, this is what you need to do, right? So
yeah, I think to that point, that's a great example of a best practice. To try to offer a technical restriction is the code, I think, says the dirt needs to be 5%, but all the soils engineering firms locally go to 10% because they're afraid to get sued. And so if we were able to offer guidance on a building code standpoint or whatever to reduce that, that cuts in half the height of the mound.
absolutely.
Paul,
Yeah.
Paul, I may follow up with you and see if we can riff on some idea that looks at all of these codes that limit the ability to develop accessible housing, and see how many, as Rep Ortiz suggests, are excuses, how many are genuine, and if we can do something to mitigate those concerns you're talking about, where people say, well, we're going to go even further, and can we do something to drive some change? I'm not a construction expert, so I'm not going to speak to that. But I would think that a hard eye on things can often find better paths to the outcomes that we're looking for. Rochelle, let me bring you in.
Thank you so much, Barrick. Rochelle Mitchell from ACCIL, Association of Colorado Centers for Independent Living. I was Representative Ortiz was cutting in and out. I was having some trouble hearing exactly what he was saying, but I wanted to comment back on something that he brought up that was really poignant, asking about how much we were pushing this legislation, or at least talking with representatives. And Aponte Busan allowed us to meet with 37 representatives in about 20 hours on Monday and Tuesday. Candidates and candidates and incumbents for different House and Senate seats. And Craig Fowler, my colleague from Boulder, and Indy Frazee, my colleague from Colorado Springs, and I were going to start a drinking game every time Representative Ortiz's name came up, just when we were talking about universal design or disability accessible housing. And we said we were so grateful to all the work he was going to do, but how are you planning on continuing that work, was our constant rhetoric that we were saying 37 times. We ended up saying it really. And so that really brought the point that once Representative Ortiz wasn't there as a visible reminder of these things, how much traction we were losing. So I really can't lift that idea more in saying we've got to remember everything. I think we should probably get a big cutout or something like that of Representative Ortiz to put up in the hallways of the Capitol, or something like that as a visual reminder. But that did come up. What we did find out, and we were able to flesh out, were several candidates and incumbents that were willing to carry on that work that we were basically trying to flesh out during those precious 25 minutes we got to spend with them. So we do have a pretty comprehensive list of at least the ones that showed up that we were able to talk to. So hopefully that will be of some help when we move down that track.
I so appreciate you sharing that, Rochelle. And before we end in a few minutes, I'll let Rep Ortiz close this out. I would suggest that part of this group's collective task, there is a big void at the state house now with Rep Ortiz moving forward with other chapters in his life. And part of the charge to all of you will be to make sure that whether someone is able-bodied or not, that they are all informed, educated, and that we find the champions that we will not have in Ortiz as an elected. Something tells me in the time I've gotten to know him as a fellow veteran, I don't believe for a minute that Rep Ortiz is done getting into, as one of our congressional heroes would say, the good kind of trouble. But I think the absence of his presence on the House floor is going to change things. And so I think we're going to have to find ways to keep rattling people. And I'm grateful that you and Aponte Busam and the group were able to make that happen. Rep Ortiz, other than me telling folks that we'll get these ideas out to everyone, that I'm going to be chasing them down to get me their lists, and that we'll be meeting same time, same date. My business is done here, so I'll let you close us out.
I mean, nothing but gratitude. Barrett, Carrie, you guys are crushing it. Thank you so much for the way that you're facilitating this task force overall and the subcommittees. It's been a joy and a pleasure to see the way that they've each grown and kind of come into the role. And it's evidenced by the ideas that y'all are coming forward with. So thank you guys so much. We still got a lot of work to do. We got to get it across the finish line, but I'm very confident at this point, definitely in this subcommittee's, all of them so far, but definitely in the subcommittee's ability. So thank you guys so much. Keep working hard. We're going to get there.
Appreciate that, Representative. Really appreciate all of the people spending their time, the members of the public that joined us, and members of state government that did. We'll follow up by email with that link to start giving us handles and emails of folks to reach out to, the nudge for you to put your own list together. By the end of next week, we'll get these ideas cleaned up on Engage Dora and ask you to circulate them. And Brian, I'll follow up with you on a couple of these points. Appreciate you all. Have a great, I guess it's Wednesday afternoon. And we'll see you in 4 weeks. Thanks all.
Take care. Bye.